You're listening to When Veins Meet Like Rivers. Katinniq, okizata, maadawaan. The podcast expanding on the meaning and behind-the-scenes creation of the exhibit by the same name, hosted by the Plug In ICA. It's a podcast about survival, desire, and kinship. It's about the places where we crash and flow into each other. It's about how and what we resist and submit to. I hope that you enjoy our offerings.
Hi, I'm Kite, and I am here with Sadie Redwing talking about Lakota design and Indigenous sovereignty. Today we'll be speaking about her research. Recently, I have been thinking about methodologies that are particularly Lakota and have looked towards Redwing's Lakota Geometric Design Shape Kit and how I can engage with Lakota epistemologies through already established forms in our culture. Since engaging with Redwing's toolkit, I have thought about it every single day. I use it on all the time. I keep it on hand to think with. I've used it to start making music scores, to make sculptures, and recently you've helped me and my family tell a story from many, many generations ago, a very traumatic story in our family, to help tell that through the shapes. And so I think it's become the most important tool to think with during the course of my PhD. All right, I want to hand it over to you. Who are you? Where are you from? Thank you so much for being here. And why did you make this shape kit?
Yeah, well, thank you for letting me join in, and I'm very just humble, just thankful to hear your story and how that one piece of a larger project has influenced you in your work. So that's it's really moving for me, and I really appreciate sharing that. So my name is Sadie Redwing. I am enrolled citizen of the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation, and I am also a descent of the Cheyenne River Lakota Nation. So for home, me would be Central South Dakota. And I know sometimes when you hear the words Dakota or Lakota or referencing North Dakota or South Dakota, it gets a little bit confusing, but Central South Dakota is home, specifically along the Missouri River. I grew up along the Bad River, right in Fort Pierce, South Dakota. So that will always be home for me. And I went to Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, got my BFA New Media Arts. Following I went to Cape Canaveral, Florida, NASA for an internship, and that was kind of like my first step into research, or per se thinking about technology, thinking about designers or in design thinking and future trends, and just kind of knew that wasn't a space for me. So had it in mind that, I would like to be a teacher. So I knew they had to get a master's. So was fortunate to be accepted at North Carolina State University and entered into the Master of Graphic Design program and graduated from there in 2016. And when I was thinking about a thesis to complete in that master's program, it was really challenging to be narrow and specific for inventing a tool for designers. So in that experience, it was tough to, one, just go through the process of research as a Native American student, only Native American student, sometimes only Native American student that either a cohort or a classmate in the cohort didn't even know that culture exists or that our race exists, or even to working with a mentor or a professor who has never mentored a Native American student before. So coming from a tribal college and wanting to express terminology that, that cohort was unfamiliar with was a little bit challenging, but I knew at the end of the day, I needed to leave that program with something that's going to help my demographic. So whether that's a Lakota demographic or Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, whether that is, for Native American demographic, or maybe that is from any type of Indigenous demographic that is looking to revitalize a language, whether it be verbal language or visual language. So I really had to nail a couple of things down. One is in thinking about what would a future world look like for myself. So to give a little bit of context of that, meaning I was raised in South Dakota, and South Dakota's rural, and you didn't notice or see the practice of graphic design the same as in the realm of agriculture or government, or it just wasn't a common practice that was shared or highlighted. And as you kind of grow in that education space, in that art space, you start to really question like communication pieces, publication pieces. And being in South Dakota, we have, we need communication pieces for our Black Hills powwow, annual powwow. We need communication pieces for our LNI, the Lakota National Invitation Tournament, or just any, for schools on the reservation that might have teams or just materials that promote their schools, and whether it be in t-shirts or uniforms, or thinking about basketball roster posters that are hung like on the fridge or whatever. I started to see what was being communicated on those materials in my own household. And I wouldn't see much of like Lakota design. I might go to a basketball gymnasium gym located on a reservation, and in that basketball gym might, just have beautiful Lakota designs influenced a lot of our beadwork and our quill work, but I wouldn't see that on our brochures, or I wouldn't see that on the flyer, and I wouldn't see that in the mailer or a piece of mail that would come in. And in my head, I'm like, who's making these? Like, it's and then in thinking about during pre early 2000s and the 90s, there probably wasn't much option to utilize Photoshop. I don't think it was either taught as much within South Dakota, but to kind of see that if you were in a position to have to create, whether you're native or you're non-native, and if you're just pulling images off Google, or if you're looking at clip art on like Microsoft Word document, there wasn't much material that reflected us as a nation. So I kind of started there. My frustration came in like, why is our like communication and design pieces so corny? And then also too, like if we are going to start moving in a direction of us as a tribe demonstrating ourselves as a sovereign nation, everybody has a profession to do that demonstration, even the graphic designer. So if I'm communicating the Lakota Nation, I better be communicating Lakota Nation. So I kind of start there, and that motivation's in my head. And then I kind of saw like, how do we as a Lakota Nation like differentiate ourselves from other tribes? So, if there's a group of 10 natives from different tribes, how would you know without speaking? How would you know just by looking of which tribe they're from? And a lot of it is based on adornment. And I know that, within our own histories and what we have exposed to artifacts, we see a lot of our visual language that is unique to us in our beadwork. And, being fortunate to grow up in a community and family members that are beaders, I kind of just started to narrow like my thinking on, well, how do they have inspiration on their beads, on their symbols? And knowing that, thinking about how could I use some of their thinking and some of their practices that could help a graphic designer that wants to design for a Lakota demographic. So when I was kind of like studying, or even too, if I'm, if we're just like in a small household and we're at the kitchen table and a relative has all their beads and stuff out, so I have like their wax and needles and the works out, and I would always see graph paper always see graph paper, and there's always color pencils, and you do not use that graph paper. You don't use the color pencils because those are used for those are specifically for the beaders. And as I started to travel and visit other homes and have other friends that do beading, I noticed that they too used graph paper and color pencils. And I thought, if I could help beaders, like think of an image, and they wouldn't have to carry this graph paper. They wouldn't have to worry about a pencil sharpener or losing like a specific color pencil. Like, what if you just had that all in a digital format? So I was kind of really thinking in that terms, which led me into this. Well, if I'm going to build a tool for them to help demonstrate a sovereign language, well, how would I do it? So this is where design research kind of came in thinking that during that time, and even some of my experience at NASA, the tablet was increasing. So meaning the tablet size. So it might have started as like an iPad size, and then you can go into a museum or you can go into a place like NASA where they have tablet as big as tables. So if you want to zoom in, or even in the airport, you can all these larger touch screens, and then now more and more, computer screens, or I guess like laptop screens are touch too. So knowing in that touch piece, that allows you to, I guess, I know it kind of have that little play aspect. So kind of thinking about how utilizing a tool like a tablet screen or a large screen, why is that helpful? Think about, why do toddlers, learn their shapes and colors and letters through just playing with their finger or pushing stuff around, or thinking about even something non-digital like an Etch-a-Sketch. Like, why is that tool used to even be creative why is that tool used to be creative in some type of aspect that allows you to work with lines? And I started to do research on other tools that allowed you to play with shapes and allowed you to kind of just use your finger in the way of assembling pieces. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. The goal is to have an app for beadwork artists to have their symbols, meaning that they don't have to constantly draw them out. They don't have to constantly get a ruler or constantly go on their graph paper and map out each of these squares. They'd already have the shapes for them. And all they would have to do is just use their finger and start connecting the, kind of brainstorming aspect. Now, that was the goal. And in that design and designing that application, that's where the shape kit came out. So I really had to think about, I have a number of symbols and I want the human experience to do this with them. So this is where this idea of, okay, let me try it physically first, because I'm not a coder. Like, I don't know, I can make prototypes, but just in thinking about, is that even going to be a good feeling to do? So the first thing that I did was I say skeleton sketches or skeleton bones, or just really basic of the shapes entailed in that toolkit. Just white ink on just black ink on white paper. I cut them up into little 1x1, 2x2 squares, and I just threw them on a table. And I said, okay, so let's say that. So in thinking about, well, what would my mobile app look like? Would I have a digital pile of shapes, and then you use your finger to pull each shape off that pile? Or maybe it's just a blank screen. And then I had to think of myself, okay, well, where are these shapes coming from? So I tried all these actions in physical form first. And with the black and white paper, you get a sense of a feeling. You got a sense to play around, and you got a sense to kind of see what's room for error and what possibilities are. So then I tried it with transparent paper and thinking about, does the transparency affect any suggested play, or does it affect any way of the user, connecting those pieces together? And then again, I'm in the head of a Lakota beader. I'm not in the headspace of somebody who has never seen Lakota design before. And I think once I got the controls down of how these shapes would connect, then I had to really think about, okay, if somebody who's not familiar with the culture, what are they going to do with these shapes? So that conversation kind of goes into a little bit more of the protocoling aspect of just making patterns out of shapes that have a great meaning to a sovereign nation, which can be furthered on into research. But specifically for the shape kit, it was a case study, and it was a practice of demoing something physical in my actual hands, of connecting these shapes together to make a larger motif or a symbol that might translate a family history, that might translate a family design, or that might translate onto a pair of moccasins or leggings, or you name it, a purse. But the main goal was I want this to be convenient for a bead art. I want the tool of the Lakota shape kit to be a convenient aspect, so that that artist does not have to rely on redrawing those shapes all the time. Like, it'd just be nice where they could either just get on there if they're sitting at a powwow and that's maybe where some of the inspiration would come in. They could just get on their phone on just say some concepts or ideas. And yeah, so that was kind of just more of a research case study that led to the human experience for something digital. So it's just nice. It's just nice to see how that aspect of that thesis process is useful, as helpful. And you actually connected me to other people who asked to use it as well. And just to see the work that is coming out of your expertise, just utilizing just those shapes, it's just wonderful. And I have no idea it'd make that much of an impact for somebody to collect and recollect on stories.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think one of my passions outside of being an artist and working with music and everything has now become methodology, and to hear the process of developing something, especially in an ethical way, and in a sovereign way, in a way that's based in our ways of knowing. I think to hear it come out of a need for a tool in beadwork is really, really, I think, important. Because when we talk about building new technologies, a lot of the times I hear people trying to reinvent the wheel in order to make something ethical or useful, but it absolutely doesn't have to be like that. Like, when we say technology, we mean all of the tools that we've been using for millennia, and those tools are already good, and have been developed slowly in a good way. And so when I think about, a lot of times I'm talking about computation or artificial intelligence, and one of my favorite examples to think through is already established frameworks like our Sweat Lodge. How do we go and collect the willow? Like, what do we have to give in order to take? And it's great because I can already look at methodologies that we use every day that are already full and vibrant. And so it's really nice to hear that in other design methodologies, because I took a design methodology class when I began my PhD, and I was very disappointed in the lack of Indigenous design methodology discussions. So, I think that brings me to my the other thing I wanted to ask you, which is about, what do you see, or what's next for you as a in your career and everything, and how do you what kind of needs do you see for the future of your field, especially in terms of, before we started recording, we were talking about design canon and design resources, and yeah, it'd be great to hear about that from you.
Yeah, you made a great point in saying that we have all these methodologies already established. And I think people forget that we've been practicing these design structures and processes and frameworks for thousands of years. And it's like there was room um, to make those processes like on point. Or let me rephrase that, like for us to be practicing ways of designing for thousands of years, like we've had that time and that time to really just be experts in those spaces, as you mentioned, the formulation of a sweat lodge, or what are some of the areas that I never thought I'd find myself in conversations, but I'm growing to, is this use of the word reciprocity, and how do we demonstrate what that looks like in design thinking and what that looks like as systematic design. And sometimes the challenge is that because our culture is so excluded, and we have to take the extra time to paint the picture of what we mean when we throw out the word something like reciprocity. Or when someone says, well, what does it mean when your perspective comes from the land? And I give them these examples. So this is kind of an idea on where I'm seeing myself in the future, but then also too, to help clarify some of the questions that you get yourself. And one of the first things I really remind my audience, so either my students or if I'm whoever might be communicating with, is that because we had great responsibilities of taking care of the land, we figured out a design process and an operating system that keeps things sustainable, that keeps things rejuvenated, balanced, and we perfected it to the point where we kept this planet alive. And one aspect of our duties within the Midwest or within the Great Plains was we had to keep that grass growing. And in order to keep that grass growing, we had to have the buffalo, because the buffalo tilled that soil the perfect amount. And I think it's really hard for people to envision how the buffalo, let's say we're packing up camp and the buffalo's going up to Canada. We're going to do a loop. We're going to come down to the Carolinas and we're going to work our way back to South Dakota. So thinking, let's just roughly say that's a 3-month journey. Within that 3 months, the amount of feet work on that soil, just work that soil just enough, versus now, you got machinery or we're so high demand of like cattle and soy and corn, to the point where we're overworking our soil so much. These machines are stomping on the ground to the point where it's killing our soil. And could you imagine if they brought in that buffalo migration pattern to make some of that soil a little bit more life flow sustainable and not kill it off? Like that's one aspect of us knowing and assembling a system that allowed that prairie to grow, because we knew that we needed that grass. That tall grass helps clean the air just like trees. We knew that's where our fruits were coming from, and we knew that the buffalo played a key part. So once we kind of start knowing the importance of how much that buffalo plays in our duties and our responsibilities and how we cultivated a culture around it, then that is an example of an Indigenous perspective brought into some of these contemporary conversations. So let's say that me and you get invited to New York City. Let's say New York City is really suffering, or let's say the design problem is homelessness in New York City. And they want to start bringing out a more inclusive and diverse designers to help design something a little bit better to help with homelessness. So if you're bringing 2 Great Plains designers into the space, what does our ideology look like, or what does our perspective look like in here? And what people don't understand is that we're bringing this knowledge that I just shared. So if I have knowledge of the buffalo, I know that buffalo hide is climate control. I know that it keeps, and I'm just roughly saying this, no one fact check me because I don't know for a fact, but inside a buffalo hide, it will stay at a good 72 degrees. So anything cold on the outside or hot on the outside, it's going to be climate control on the inside. So if you're asking me as a Lakota designer to help with homeless shelters or to help with homeless, I'm saying, look, build some teepees. It's like, you're not needing any metals. All you're going to need is, just the natural resources of a teepee, and that can help with a homeless shelter. Now, what would that look like in a little bit more modern or more urban sense? It might not look like a traditional teepee, but at least we know that in needing shelter or needing clothing, buffalo hide works. And I know people are like, well, I don't want to live like in the skin of a buffalo. I was like, well, I do. Like, it'd be nice. Like, I like seeing it in my community, or I like, having a buffalo robe or buffalo blanket. But that's just one example of how our perspective just really is still primitive in some sense, and that we have science, or we have knowledge and science of animals and plant species and weather patterns that could help in some of these design areas. So to answer your question about the future, like, I really want to start help painting the picture so that when future Native designers and Native researchers are brought into these space where things are quote unquote a little bit more contemporary, it wouldn't be, I don't want people to be making a joke out of our knowledge, when that knowledge is pure, and we need that in order to just keep our planet alive. Another area that is a little bit outside of that reciprocity conversation, but really communicating and visually communicating what sovereignty is. And I feel like what is so beautiful is more and more tribes are getting their federal recognition, and more tribes are making an effort to show identity in the media. So not necessarily mainstream media like the news, but I want to say just any type of multimedia, whether that be, government documents when building greater relationships between the U.S. government and their tribal government, or, having better tribes websites, or just even like, any aspect that demonstrates a sovereign nation's treaties, or any of their policies, and they want them to, show that they are a specific nation. We need more and more educated designers and knowing how to design for a nation. Traditionally, a graphic design student does not learn how to design for the entire United States, but we are in the stage of nation building where in my classroom, I want students confident that they can go work for their tribal governments and they'll be able to design for them and use, or if they're in the point where they're revitalizing visual languages now, that they know the protocols and how to work with the language. Because it's real, we're in the time where the motivation's there, we're having the resources and technology. We just need to make sure that in the means of collaboration with non-Indigenous, that we know how to work those conversations, we know how to educate those conversations, be respectful in those conversations so that we can help tribes survive and be sustainable and bring some of their knowledge out where other areas of the region in the country may not know. And lastly, another area where I hope to see in the future that I like to speak on within my work is, like I mentioned in our conversation before, is I feel like we are still in the era of having to paint the picture, quote unquote, paint the picture. So for example, in my public presentations, I will ask, the audience or students or whoever workshoppers, if they ever ate at a Native American fast food chain. And just even that little question goes into a rabbit hole of questions, but we do it in a way that we're using an example that everyone is familiar with. So fast food, no, I haven't. And I would say, oh, well, if there was, would you name 5 meals off that? And they're like, no. And then like, well, There's so much opportunity. You want to talk about making safe spaces for Native Americans, whether that's in a mall food court, a campus food court, or just even just within our, towns that rely on fast food, how much education we could provide in Native American culture just by a fast food chain, and how that can branch into, well, maybe a university offers a franchise program in their business degree track that allows Native American students to learn how to run a franchise. And you got to bring in a Native American architecture to build the building. And you got to bring in somebody who's knowledgeable in food sovereignty. Then you got to bring in somebody who's going to be able to brand that fast food, plus, making ads and the whole work. So the beautiful side of the coin of not having that is there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And that's where you can start building a team. But the challenge is making sure that the potential team has the resources to be educated in those spaces. So if it's not an Native American fast food chain, then what if it's a Alexa or OK Google or Siri that speaks in tribal languages? So again, you're going to need a linguist. You're going to need somebody who knows how to program it. If there's going to be a Alexa that speaks Navajo, the market or the packaging and the marketing that's going to go on a Navajo family's doorstep is going to be different than Lakota families. So having to express that, look, the dominant demographic has all these things and it's improving, quote unquote, improving their existence and sustainability. Well, we need those things too. And it's not so much to the point where we're appropriating those technologies. That's when there's conversations of what adapting these technologies in for survival, or just even to revitalization, and being knowledgeable on how to communicate that process or communicate that interpretation of how to navigate out of exploitation or appropriation, or what actual Indigenous perspective looks like in the practice of design, whether that's graphic design or design across the board, but then also thinking about designing thinking, systematic thinking, or just our operation systems. And there's so much rich knowledge that we have in all those areas that are going to be useful in the process of invention, the process of communication, the process of just documentation. Like we said, like it's really hard for us to have these resources. And one of the reasons was we're not a race that had the printing press as the Western graphic design canon shares in their graphic design history. And we don't have histories of libraries or how there was great documentation of, let's say, Renaissance philosophers. A lot of that invention was brought over to us within like the last 300 years. So thinking about how much that system of citing resources or documented research and preservation of those documentations, we never had that. And if we did, it was more in a visual form, or we lost it, and we lost it through colonization and colonialism. So I'm really pushing to translate why it's so hard for a Native American student to obtain resources within design research, because people forget that a lot of stuff was introduced to us just 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and we didn't have a need for all of that, all those other tools that was created in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century. So it's really, like I said, it's really hard to paint the picture in that sense, but it's the vision's got to be there, or else we're just going to be running around with like chickens with their heads cut off. And I think that's what is so important of the work that me and you do, is that we're bringing a lot of these visions to life. If not, we're projecting where it needs to go, and that's important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Do you want to mention your new position?
Sure thing. So Currently, I hold the title of a student success coach at the American Indian College Fund, which is located in Denver, Colorado. And this position is more directed toward advocating for Native American student experience, whether that's in a tribal college or outside of tribal college, but specifically making sure that students have the resources to keep their retention in higher education spaces. So I definitely adore this work. If you know me, you know of my work, I have two passions: is advocating for that Native American student, and then also building courses for Native American students. If you want to have a classroom for Native American students, you got to know how to keep them in the classroom. So I think that's why folks might hear me jump around in my own expertise. But starting 2022, I will be teaching at OCAD U, so Ontario College of Art and Design University in Toronto. So soon I will be heading up north, but I am very aware of what has been going on in Canada this past few months, and I am following my heart and definitely looking to go up and help our relatives up there. So not looking forward to the cold, but just to know that there is opportunity to build curriculum, there's opportunity to get back into the classroom, and there's a demographic that is in need of educated Indigenous design researchers, and I'm more than happy to do service in that area. So I'm very excited to be at OCAD U.
Awesome. That is so exciting for all of us. That's what we really want to see, is more of us doing really good work in these big institutions. So I just want to mention that your website is sadieredwing.com, SADIEREDWING.com. If you want to see more of the shape kit and the frameworks, your writing, it's all there along with your other design work. And I'll say, Wopila, thank you so much for being here.
Beautiful. Thank you. Toksha, okay.
Hello, I am Corey Stover. My Lakota name is Shugumani Tuska. I'm an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Suzanne Kite is my Hunka sister, and she's also my niece. I live here on the reservation. I grew up here most of my life. I am a Lakota Studies major. I graduated from Oglala Lakota College with a Bachelor's of Art in Lakota Studies with emphasis in Indian law. I have an Associate of Arts in Lakota Studies and an Associate of Arts in Tribal Law as well from Oglala Lakota College. And I am currently working on a Master of Legal Studies in Indigenous People Law at the University of Oklahoma College of Law in Norman, Oklahoma. I work for Oglala Lakota College as a department chair and program facilitator director of the vocational education program, which provides technical training to students here on the reservation in the areas of carpentry, automotive technology, office technology, and electrical technology. And I've been at that job for a little over a year, and I've been with the college going on 3 years total.
And what kind of art practice do you do?
So I've done a lot of different, my art style is more traditional focus, but contemporary in the sense that I do a lot of dancing regalia, which was my main focus and my initial start in traditional arts. I did, since I was young, a lot of different regalia for myself and of course for my sisters. And as that developed, my love for beading and stuff sort of came out of that. But I've kind of danced around with, a sewing machine and beadwork and different things. But my main focus today is doing unique beaded pieces. A lot of times I do, one-of-a-kind earrings and medallions with different types of logos that people like, sports teams, different brands. And I usually do a little bit smaller pieces, but I do make regalia. I've made my own regalia. I'm a powwow dancer, been a powwow dancer since I was probably about 7 years old. And I started out as a fancy dancer. I now dance chicken. I make all my own regalia. My sister was formerly a jingle dress dancer as she was growing up, and I made all of her regalia. And my other little sister is not really into powwow either, but I carry on that tradition for them, and I make them the different regalias to have on hand in the event that they do want to dance. But my main art focus is probably beadwork. I do a little quill work here and there, not really a whole lot. And I'm pretty much what you would call, I guess I do impromptu beadwork, I guess you could say. I just take a design that comes to me as I go. I find a center point and I just use the beads and the colors and my mind to create whatever I feel like Spirit is trying to put, using me as their tool to make designs.
That's a great segue into talking about this collaboration that we've done together. So Corey and I have collaborated a lot over the years, actually, past few years. A lot of like interview type stuff, discussion stuff, kind of working, using our relationship as like the material where we're do what we normally do. We just talk on the phone. We talk about what's important to us, talk about family stuff, talk about like spirituality, talk about our art practices, and a lot of our collaborations come out of that. And so this piece that I made with Corey and my Aunt Becky Redbow, it was done the way that we normally do have conversations, where we're sitting at the kitchen table and we're telling stories. And so in this particular piece, I listened to the story of Iron Road, and then we talked a little bit about relationships with stones. And so yeah, I think that like your quill work practice and beadwork practice are why we chose to use these symbols, these geometries in the piece. And so maybe just describe what it was like to use those things and what story we told.
Yeah, and so those geometry symbols and things, myself, I've never really interpreted them as meanings, because growing up here, I just always looked at the way other people did their beadwork and their regalia and stuff, and just sort of came up with my own version of that before I actually ever understood that was, a unique form of how Lakota people, how we did our artwork. And there's, a lot of times family designs and colors that are used and stuff. And that really wasn't anything that I was aware of until I got older and started coming in contact with more and more artists who, are relating back to the traditional realm. So actually doing that project was a really fun project to depict the story of our great-grandmother who ran from the massacre at Wounded Knee and made her way to safety and ended up, actually being enrolled in a whole different tribe than where she was from, and living on a whole different reservation from where her parents had originally came from and whatnot. And using those symbols and different, creating a storyline, it's a lot like the winter count on the Buffalo Robe, where they depict each year by a picture, but basically we did it in the form of using different symbols and basically making like a design template of this story, which in a sense, now that we've actually, people in our family have actually gone through the process of doing that in some form, that could essentially be a family design to represent our family from our grandmother, whose grandmother came from the massacre. So for me, that was a very interesting project, and it's kind of geared my interest towards, as I create my designs, and maybe starting to go back and look at my older projects, my more original projects where I was just starting out, and finding some of the similarities to the designs I use today versus what I was using back then, and just maybe, learning how to create a more uniform system of how I do my designs, and having a story as to why. Because I'm more of a freestyle artist. I developed my skill and talent all on my own. I didn't really come from a line of beadworkers or a line of quill workers or anything like that. I mean, I can't speak for my ancestors because I'm sure that there were some who did that. But passing directly down from like my grandmother to my mother to me, my grandmother did do beadwork, but she always did necklaces and different things that were more like small projects, where I always wanted to venture and do something large, like a dress top or a pair of moccasins, just something. I've done the moccasins, I've never done the dress yet. That's definitely a goal here, in the future, but I've always aspired to do the bigger projects, and I think that's what geared my beadwork in a different direction than kind of the rest of my family, because no one was really into doing such big projects. So when I did my first set of regalia for my outfit, and it took me a little while because it was my first go around, but it was actually the first time I've ever done anything on that scale. And over the years I've added to it, and actually, I've become more and more appreciative of it as I look back at it and I look at the stitching, and because the Lakota, we're really known for doing the lazy stitch. And I actually just read a article on this, and it changed my perspective on using the term lazy stitch, because it's actually kind of a really strange way to depict how much work you put into it, actually. But I analyzed it differently. The article kind of went along about, talking about how we shouldn't devalue our grandmothers and mothers and our work, speaking more in the women aspect, because for some reason we've leaned more towards beadwork as being a more feminine attribute, but where I'm from, a lot of men do beadwork, and they do exceptionally fine beadwork. Probably some of the best beadwork you'll find out there, and it comes from the men. And not all are two-spirited, but some are, and that actually, you could kind of see that in their artwork and the way they portray their spirit through their artwork. But so I'm learning how to look at the lazy stitch in a different way, but that's what we're known for, is doing the lazy stitch. And I always assumed it was because it would, from a distance, mock the rows that we would do with quill work prior to beads being introduced.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It does mimic that shape.
Yeah, it kind of makes the rows. So if you look at quill work, how the rows go across, and then they incorporate the geometrical designs in the quill work, they've kind of taken that same theme and went with the beadwork to make it in the rows as well. Because you won't see a whole lot of tribes do, like Crow, for example, do a lot of really fine, flat applique beadwork, like I don't know if they call it applique, but I think they call it more like a straight stitch. And then you have a lot of other tribes who do really unique designs and a lot of floral patterns and different stuff. But, Lakota designs you could sort of spot out from anywhere because of our geometrical shapes. We use a lot of the teepee or different sunburst patterns and different things like that. Sort of the way we do the star quilt as well. So we'll do a lot of the different fades of colors in the star quilt, and you'll see that also be in the beadwork with the geometrical shapes and the pointed tops. And then a lot of times you'll see it mirroring, because when you see the mirroring in beadwork, when you see the design connecting and it's the same on both sides, that's a person wanting to represent, so above is so below, kind of mirroring the spirit world to our world.
Yeah, that's a really good. You hit on like all of the little like fine details of like what is women's work, like what is the like people's roles and like important roles of two-spirit artists in families, like keeping beadwork and like traditions going from our grandmothers, and like and then I think one of the things that you said when you started talking about like revisiting your early work, and I think that's one thing that comes up when when I've talked to different Lakota not even beadworkers, just people who like make their beadwork, and they're like, oh, like I am a tool, like, and that's like definitely a Lakota spiritual perspective, is that we're channels for the spirit world, and that our artwork, and it's in a really normal way, like you just make things, and it seems subtle and kind of normal, that when you make things, you're just inspired and it just comes out of you. But then, like, looking back on it, you can see that there are deeper spiritual meanings to all these geometries, to making doubles of things, to making mirrors of things. Like, everything comes back to like the spiritual aspect of our culture and our art. And yeah, and it's like, maybe if we looked at your beadwork from when you were younger and we reinterpreted it with the kind of definitions of the symbols that we're using now, maybe we could like see what you were thinking about or dreaming about or spiritually going through at the time.
And I've done, so many different types of like little projects that never really got off the ground, and I always used to really like kind of like kick myself about that, like, well, how come I can't finish this or finish that? And now when I look back, I see all these different projects that were like, the way I view it now is those were the stepping stones that helped me develop my skill more and more. And I think, one thing that taunts beadworkers is perfection. And when you first start out, you look at it in a way where if you make a stitch a certain way, or the beads didn't lay a certain way, you learn how to work with them over time, where they lay flatter and they fit together better because you're actually taking the time to sort of size the beads out. I mean, those are skills you ain't going to know when you first do it. It develops over time. And all these little projects that I kind of, started, where I maybe sat down and I had this idea that I was going to create something. And a lot of times what I would do is just sort of get that design out on like a little strip of material and just sort of see how that design was going to look, or how those colors fit together, or how that design would be shaped if I, cut it in half and turned it this way and, whatnot. And it really makes it, I think it's fun now when I look back. I always thought I should go back and finish those projects. And, I'm thinking now that you mentioned that, is I could probably create a piece with all of these, different projects together, kind of as like a storyline of, the development of my beadworking over the years, because I started doing beadwork when I was probably, I want to say like 11 years old. I just wanted to dance. I wanted to powwow. I had a single mom, and she didn't have all the money in the world to buy me the outfits and things that I wanted. Like, other people were fortunate enough to have those links, and it was just me and my mom. We lived in Portland, Oregon at the time, and my little brother as well. And I just started, like, we would go to powwows, and I started dancing, and I had an old regalia that my grandfather, Mark Cliff Simiga, had given me, and it was a fancy dance outfit. It was way too big for me. I had to like fix it to make it fit. And I just got out there and I was dancing, and I would get in the contest, and I started winning money, and I started realizing, well, hey, okay, if I dance and I do good and I win money, and I was able to, eventually buy a sewing machine and buy the materials little by little, and started creating new regalia. And I remember one of the first ones I sewed for myself was a satin dance outfit, fancy dance outfit, and I had put all this design in there, and I put feathers and stuff, but I didn't know how to do like a satin stitch. And I always, kicked myself because I looked at everybody else's stuff and they had the nice satin stitch around their embroidery and stuff. And so that was a huge learning step for me. And over time, I now know how to do the satin stitch on the sewing machine, and I could create the really beautiful designs. And I think back, I'm like, it used to be so difficult, and now I could sit down with a few pieces of material, come up with a really cool design, and put it on a shirt, or put it on a skirt, or put it on somebody's dance regalia for them, or whatever, and it just flows. It comes so easily. But there was a process. It never did happen overnight. It was something that over time that grew more and more, and I was able to do those things. And people took note of that in my community, and they would approach me for different things here and there, for regalia or for personal beaded items or things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things that makes me think of is how our artwork changes over time with all our influences, and how, you know, the way we looked at the Lakota geometries together is like I'm coming from one art world and you're coming from your art world, and bringing them together with like a family collaboration is like, it's so great to look at it, and I'm so happy that it's recorded so we can look at it for like the rest of our lives, and show
Yes.
younger people in the family as they grow up. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I'll talk to you
definitely.
soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
When Veins Meet Like Rivers is hosted and recorded by Katinniq, Dana Danger, and Kite. Additional guests on this episode include Corey Stover and Sadie Redwing. Our intro and outro song is an original score produced by Kite. Podcast art by Katinniq. This podcast is presented by Plug In Institute of Contemporary Art. You can find a link to the Plug In website in our show notes. We are produced by Collective Broadcast Co., an artist-run collective specializing in tech and live stream solutions. You can find the link to their website in our show notes. This episode is supported by Plug In ICA's generous donors, including the Directors Circle, Canada Council for the Arts, the Manitoba Arts Council, the Winnipeg Arts Council, and MB 150. It's the great day to be Indigenous. Mama peace.